Hey, good morning, everybody. As you're signing in and coming online, great to see you. I would encourage you, if all possible, to turn on your webcam so that we can see your beautiful faces. And of course, it's great for our presenter to be able to see who he's speaking to. Uh, we would also invite you, and you'll hear me say this a few times in the next 5 minutes, to put your name in the chat and the name of your ministry, where you're from, and how long you've been with the GC. And you will see a map on your screen that will show where people are signing in from around the world, actually, depending where they are. And so you can see in the middle of your screen there, the W, that's me, I'm Willie, and I'm in Calgary. Our speaker, Greg, you can see the G from his name there, who's in Georgetown, Ontario. So we would encourage you to do that. Hey, thanks, Harold, from Alexandria. Awesome. And Kirsten from Vancouver. Oh, we got Rachel in Lansing, Michigan. Dan from St. Catharines. Hey, Sherry Ann, St. Catharines. Awesome. Nicaragua, Andy. Oh, wonderful. So again, as people are coming online, encourage you to turn on your camera and in the chat put your name, where you're from, name of your ministry, and how long you've been with GC so others can see you. One of our great hopes, besides providing a great webinar, is to let you see others who may be with the Great Commission who are in your same city, and to connect you to each other and build some of those relationships. We would love to see that happen. Yeah, Daniel from Southwestern Ontario. Oh, Heather from South Africa, and I'm not even sure I can try and pronounce that. That's beyond my vocabulary. Tom from Philly. Oh, Harold, you're a long timer. Going back to the beginnings of with Stuart, our founder. That's awesome. That's what do we got? 25 years ago, if I got that right. We're just going to take a couple more minutes and invite you in. Again, we invite you, if you just come on, turn on your camera, and in the chat, put your name of your ministry, where you're from, and how long you've been with GC, so we can see where people are from and give you the opportunity to see who's online with us and perhaps meet someone in your same city. The other day, I was talking to one of our ministries that does rescue homes in India, and found out the person leading it was in the same city I am, in Calgary. They just live on the other side of town. So our next time we meet is going to be in person, which is wonderful. Victoria from Winnipeg, Alice from Vaughan, Deidre and Brody from Quebec. Love my friends in Quebec. Uh, Again, welcome everyone. My name is Willie Reimer, and I serve as the Chief Impact Officer with Great Commission Foundation. excited to host this webinar today with my good friend Gregg Hinzelman, who will be presenting, and I'll introduce him shortly. Again, I would encourage you to turn on your cameras so we can see who you are, and turn off your microphones unless asked to do otherwise, just to keep any background noise out. And Our hope for these webinars is to help encourage you and equip you in the ministry that God has called you to. There will be a question and answer at the end of Gregg's presentation. So you see the QR code for Slido, which is where we would ask you to put your questions. And we're going to use that app to facilitate the question and response time. So please use that or the link that's in the chat that's been provided there, and this will come up numerous times so that we can make sure we facilitate the question and response conversation. Again, please put your name, the name of your ministry, where you're from, or where you're located, and how long you've been with GC in the chat. And we would love to see that populated on the map that we've been showing. So we're excited to spend some time together. We had a great webinar with Ellen Graff Martin, and you can watch that. You can get access to the recording to that if you haven't already seen that. That's available on the registration page, and as will the rest of the seminars as well will be available there for you to review or to show to your staff, or however that may be that you would best serve your ministry. So as part of the Great Commission Foundation, one of our great hopes, as I mentioned earlier, is also to connect ministries to each other. So often we don't, we work in our little lane and we serve in that lane, which is wonderful, but often there's other ministries who serve in the same field that we do, and we can learn so much from each other and serve with each other. So one of the hopes, as you put your name into the map, see where people are located, give you an opportunity to perhaps meet other Great Commission ministries that are serving out of the same city that you're in or in the same sector that you're in. And so we would encourage you to take a look and build those connections. Well, we're going to jump into the webinar now, and it's my privilege to introduce to you Gregg Hinzelman. Gregg's a good personal friend. He serves as the chief catalyst and founder of a ministry called Multiplied Impact. And Gregg comes from a long history of serving with Power to Change, of leading ministries, and also serving as a fundraiser in many different ways within Power to Change, and also with Multiplied Impact. He has served in training, and his resources are being used actually around the world with Power to Change in the Canadian version, or CREW, which is the global name. And he now serves to train particularly young entrepreneurs in understanding their kingdom view, their understanding of themselves in Christ, and what it means to be and create a kingdom impact with what God has given them as entrepreneurs and as citizens of God's kingdom. And I've had the privilege of working with Gregg the past few years, and also having him speak into my life. And so as we were considering this webinar series, I understand and know Gregg's passion for this. His training has been helpful to me personally, and thought it would be great to pass that on to our ministry accounts. So I'm going to pray for Gregg and then hand it over to him. So Father, thank you for this morning or afternoon, depending where we are in the world. And thank you for everyone who's online, those who are still becoming online, those who will watch this in recorded format. And I pray that you will take the things you've put into Gregg, that he's been able to articulate and to use for your glory, and to pass on to others for your glory and for kingdom impact, for the benefit of the leaders and ministries that are gathered here today and who will see this. So speak to Gregg, speak through Gregg to us, and may it bring glory to your kingdom purposes. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Willie. Hey, great to be here with you guys. I'm not sure how, if get some quick coaching to me. How do I see everybody else? I can't see it right now. There we go. That's helpful. Great. Well, thanks for joining us today. Just a quick introduction. My name is Gregg Hinzelman. As Willie said, I've been part of GCF for a little over 5 years now. Before that, spent about 31 years with the ministry Crew or Power to Change. God called us to start a ministry called Multiplied Impact about 5 years ago to really focusing on helping these young marketplace leaders develop and act on a God-sized kingdom vision leading to a global impact. And so, actually, Stuart Rempel, when first moved to Canada and was starting to raise money, Stuart Rempel was one of the guys that was coaching me and giving me some input. So it's kind of fun to be connected that way. I spent about 22 years in the campus ministry working with university students across Canada. Did a little bit in the States for a while as well, and then I moved into more of a fundraising role with Power to Change. Where I was able to help. At the last few years, I was doing that, raising a little over $1 million a year. In my current role, I'm raising about 300 or so thousand just for our ministry and the things that we're doing. But beyond that, our ministry is really about helping other ministries. And so we actually have a number of donors that I encourage to give to a number of different ministries. And through that, we're seeing millions of dollars being released for the kingdom, which has been really fun. Um, I've also been involved in helping to launch 4 different giving funds. So there's one that's called the Least Reached Evangelism Fund, and then one called the Least Reached Discipleship Fund. So they're kind of sister funds that focus on funding ministry happening in some of the least reached parts of the world. I've been able to start a collective with some of the guys in Multiplied Impact, where we are pooling some money and investing in some larger projects right now. And then I was able to actually get started, help to launch the Damascus Road Foundation, which is one of the larger foundations in Canada that's focused on helping to reach the unreached. So you get a little peek into my heart, the things that I care about deeply. But also want to give you a little more context. I'm not a professional fundraiser. Like many of you, I was a guy who got into ministry, needed to fund my ministry, and so I needed to learn how to do this. So I have no formal fundraising training, no certification or anything. Most of what I've learned has been being a field person who just needed to raise the bucks. And so, over the next 40 minutes or so, what I hope to do with you guys is just sharing some of the lessons that I've learned as a field ministry person who has to raise support for both personal and ministry. And I would say that most of my experience comes from, reading some books, going to the odd seminar, but a lot of it's just trial and error and learning how to grow in that. I've had some good people like Stuart and others who have built into me and coached me on this over the years as well. So hopefully this stuff will be relevant. Many of you I know are interested in personal support. I'm not going to touch on that as much. We're going to talk about the integration of both personal and ministry support. But I would recommend one resource if you don't have it, and maybe if our team can put this in the chat. It's a book called The God Ask by a guy named Steve Shadrach, Shadrach. The God Ask. It's one of the best books I've ever read on personal support raising. So I just would strongly encourage you picking that up if very detailed and helpful. So I know that many of you, when you think about fundraising, you get a little bit nervous. It can be a daunting and scary type of thing to do. But my hope is that during the seminar, we'll remove some of that fear and show you that actually, through some tools and some strategies, that fundraising can actually be a lot of fun. In fact, some of my closest friends are people that I've met through donor development. So hopefully you'll find this really practical. I also want to, before we get too far in, I want to talk about two aspects, 2 points about time. Time is really important. First of all, the first thing about time is that just like ministry, donor development takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while to build some trust and build the vision and that type of thing. And so you need to know that don't be discouraged if things don't really start rolling in the first year. And even though I know the clock is ticking, you need that money, but take your time to trust God over time to raise that. But the second thing about time that's really important, is that you have to prioritize time for fundraising. A lot of people just try to fit it in here or there, and that almost never works. You have to spend an intentional amount of time, a significant amount of time, where you're saying, okay, this is where I'm going to dedicate, half a day, 2 days a week, depending on your needs for the ministry, where you're meeting with donors, helping them to engage in things like that. And so I've coached a number of ministries over the years in donor development, and there is a one-to-one correlation between the people who invest the time, who see success, and those who don't, they won't see success. So it's pretty clear there. The other thing I'll just mention, just at the end, I'll talk about this again if anyone's interested. This presentation is a condensed version of a 5 video series that I've put together that's being used by Crew and other ministries on major major donor development. And so we'll be talking about that at the end of the session. If any of you are interested in purchasing a copy of that, we've got a discount for the GCF people here. So let me start us off and just say that donor development is ultimately a spiritual activity. I'm constantly have to remind myself that the only way we're going to see God provide or see our money come in is if for God to provide it. And there's three verses that help remind me about this. The first one is Deuteronomy 8:18, which says, "But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to create wealth or produce wealth or to raise funds." And so fundraisers can sometimes we can get overly dependent on strategies and different hard work or whatever, but we must never forget that God is the source of our funding. And there's two other passages I want to give to you that I think are very important in fundraising, and that's just remembering who our God is. The first one is Genesis 1:16, which says that God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. And it's kind of a, parenthetical statement. He also made the stars. I just have always gripped by that statement. By the way, he just created trillions and trillions of these massive fireballs all over the universe. And I love Ephesians 3:20 as my theme verse for my life. Now to him who's able to do exceeding abundantly beyond all that we could ask or imagine. And so we need to remember while we're fundraising, this is the God who we're serving. This is the God who's looking after our needs. And so, in light of this, it's obviously very important that we're spending significant time praying, maybe even fasting, and really giving the Lord the room to run to provide the funding for us. And I think it's significant, of course, that Jesus, before he chose his 12 disciples, chose to pray all night. And so I think it's important that we give that same level of prayer to seeing our funding come in and spend significant time doing that. So we're going to get very practical here. So where do we find major donors? Many of you will say, I don't know any major donors. And I would say that you probably do. They're often already in your network. And so there could be friends and family that you may know. There's alumni of your ministry or current donors. And you never really thought about the possibility that these people could be significant ministry donors. When I first started raising support, what I did is I kind of separated my personal supporters from the rest of the ministry support list. But over time, that list has merged significantly. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that I raise my own personal support in addition to the ministry support that we raise. And so over time, that's kind of how we've done it. We've kind of merged those two lists. And so there are some people that in my network that I only talk to about personal support. And there are some people that I only talk to about ministry support. But a lot of these people, as I get to know them and we spend more time with them and getting to know their heart, they will become donors. If they're ministry donors, they'll support us personally or vice versa. And so, and so often the best place for you to start to think about major donors are your current donors. And you may think, well, these people already give to me personally. I don't want to bother them to ask them for more money. Or they're major donors to other ministries. And one of the things that's really important that helped me a long time ago is to think about the idea of different pockets. So, for example, my wife and I have a pocket that is for personal support. We give to some individuals in different parts of the world and we'll support them, maybe 100 a month or, 50 a month, whatever. But there's kind of a cap on that pocket. But we have another pocket that we'll give out, for ministries. And in particular, my heart is, as I mentioned earlier, some of the least reached. And so we will actually find other ways of providing funding for ministry that's happening in that. And other donors are the same way. They may have a pocket for evangelism that hasn't been tapped into, or a pocket for leadership development, or some kind of missions. And so you want to remember that donors, different pockets, you will be able to identify those as you get to know them a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I just want to give you one example. When I was starting in the ministry, first moved to Ontario back in the late 90s, one of the gentlemen who started supporting us came on at about $200 a month. A very successful business leader. And over time, our relationship deepened. We did a good job communicating. As couples, we'd get together, as families, we'd do things together. And that grew. And over time, I learned to ask him for a little bit more. Hey, you've given me 200 a month this year. Would you be open to giving 3 or even 400 a month next year? And I saw his personal support grow. And then at one point, I, got up the courage to say, well, our ministry needs to raise some money as well. Would you be open to giving maybe $10,000 towards our ministry? And he did that. And over the time, this man is still a supporter of mine. Has followed us over to GCF, and they give us about $40,000 a year for our personal ministry with Multiplied Impact, and then we also raise another $80,000 a year from them that we actually distribute to other ministries. And so you can see this was someone who started off at $200 a month, but over time they've become very significant donors to our ministry as well. Um, and as I said, I've asked some ministry donors to consider supporting us personally or and some vice versa. And so if you do a good job of working with these donors, giving them kind of the vision of what you're doing, good communication, things like that, over time, as these donors, they're going to get promotions. Their business is going to grow. Their kids are going to graduate from university. So you'll see over time their capacity for giving will grow, and so you have an opportunity to grow with them. And I think a lot of ministry people miss this because we're do a poor job of deepening those relationships. And often we're just going for the, hey, I need the money really quick, and we don't do a good job of follow up or engaging them and communication, things like that. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. And the other thing to remember is that these current donors, you have several people who really love your ministry. They've supported you for a while. They're like, oh, we think what you're doing so fabulous. Go back to them and say, listen, I need your help. We need to raise, let them know X amount of dollars. We're looking for some more people to talk to. Are there any people that you could think of who we might be able to meet? And so, always want to be looking for opportunities to expand your network and invite more people to learn about your ministry. So one of the questions you may ask is, well, how do I know what major donors look like? And this next slide will show you. This is kind of some questions that I've learned to ask over the years. Do they own their own business? Do they own more than one business? Do they have a trust or a foundation? And those things you can actually find out often by going online, looking them up on LinkedIn or elsewhere. There's lots of information online that you can find to just kind of find out who you're talking to. Do they own multiple properties? Are they an executive at their company? Are they professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants, etc.? Are they entrepreneurs? There's kind of the small business owner, the local shopkeeper kind of person, and then there's entrepreneurs who may have a small business but are, a little more expansive thinking and risk taking and things like that. And so those are different types of questions you may want to ask yourself. So, the classic donor profile is typically a wealthy male, somewhere in their 50s or 60s, who are typically supporting a number of different charities. And so while I don't necessarily want to discourage you from pursuing people like this, as your ministry may align with many people there, and you will see some donors who will come through who kind of fit that profile. I've learned over time that I want to go to what are known as blue ocean areas. I want to go to some places where no one else is kind of fishing, if you will. I want to go to some places that often get ignored. So let me give you some other categories of donors. One of them is women. I see several women on the call here today, and actually you have an advantage to connect deeply with some of these women who are executives, who own their own businesses, at whatever. And so this is a great way. I think it's one of the biggest untapped opportunities because people kind of go to the usual suspects about who they think will have the money, and they often miss these opportunities. And the great thing about some of these women is that they are looking for opportunities to mentor. They would love the chance to maybe mentor you as a leader, and come alongside you, and then also to invest in your ministry. A second group of women to look at is the wives of some of these wealthy people. They often get overlooked. The husbands are kind of the rock stars oftentimes in these situations, and the wives are just as gifted. They just don't have the profile. And so getting to know them can be really valuable. I've got a friend of mine, a couple, we'll call them Matt and Sally, and Matt and I connect on a number of different levels. We have a great time together, and so in recent years, our wives have met each other and gotten to know each other. My wife and Sally are Instagram buddies, and we keep up and pray for each other. And so yeah, it's been great, getting to know them together as well. So another one I wrote down, and again, I think as the elderly often get overlooked. There's some really gifted, brilliant, godly people that are, would love to hear more about what you're doing. And so sometimes they kind of get marginalized. I actually gave a presentation to a number of elderly people at our church, and afterwards they thanked me for saying, hey, we still have something to contribute. And they often feel ignored. And so, there may be some people that you want to think about there. Another category that I've spent a lot of time, and this is kind of the core of our ministry, is young business leaders or entrepreneurs. And this is really more of a long-term play. I've had a number of really successful young entrepreneurs I've worked with that I've met through networking and whatever. But often when I meet them, they're pretty early in their career. So it's a bit of a, can be a bit of a gamble there. But, I mean, there's one guy that I met, literally when he was working in his parents' basement, and the guy's given some just ridiculously sized gifts now that he was able to sell his business a few years ago. I found the other thing I remember talking to one of these guys. This guy had sold a portion of his business and came out with several million dollars. And I said, so do you have any, fundraisers coming to talk to you? And he says, I don't think so. And I said, oh, you'll know. They'll start showing up soon. And sure enough, he's got a line of people that are trying to meet with him these days. But I was able to meet him and get to know them and have a ministry in their lives far before anybody else. They were on anybody else's radar. So another category I put in is farmers or agriculture workers, or not workers, but owners. I don't have I don't connect as well there. I don't have any kind of a background there, but some of you do. You've come from more rural situations, and this is kind of where you live, and so this is a great group of people to connect with. Often a lot of resources there that can be really beneficial. And so one thing I'll mention, just kind of parenthetically to this, is that with all donors, but particularly people like farmers or some other people in different kind of seasonal businesses, you really want to be wise and sensitive about the timing. For example, you don't want to necessarily ask for money when they're in the process of, sowing because they're just, all their money has gone out and now they're hoping for a big crop, but they don't know. And different businesses have different seasonality. So you want to be thinking about that and the timing of when you do that. One other thing too is often mentioned professionals, doctors and lawyers are another group. I find these people a little more challenging just from a time standpoint. They're just hard to get connected to, and so I haven't had as much personally success with that. I've worked with a few doctors and yeah, so it's been okay, but it just a kind of a caution there. So. The other thing I'll just mention when you're thinking about who to work with is really look for people that you enjoy being with. You can't always control this. There's going to be some people you don't connect with as well, or it's uncomfortable or whatever. But over time, I've learned that I've raised the most money from the people that I tend to enjoy the most. We connect well personally, we think similarly, and so we just really enjoy each other. And so it makes the donor development process that much more fun. And so you want to kind of find your tribe of who you can be hanging out with there. So once we meet people, what are we going to do with them? Well, one of the most important questions you can ask yourself is, what is the type of vision that I'm currently giving my potential donors, my current and potential donors? And so if you think about the typical wealthy person, I remember talking to one guy, I said, okay, I'm here to talk to you about money. How many people has come by to ask you for money or sent you an email or a phone call this week? And he's like, I think you're the 15th or something like that. Like these people are bombarded. So how do you set yourself apart? Well, you set yourself apart by giving them a compelling vision. And so what will set you apart is your vision, your conviction about the importance of what you're doing, and your passion. And so let me just share a few principles about what vision is and what it's not. First of all, vision is not your specific plans. You can go back in the slide. We're not there yet. Thanks. Vision is not your specific plans. They are really, it's not talking about I led a Bible study this week, or we're now going through the book of Luke, or I'm discipling some people, or I'm helping to feed the poor, whatever. You don't want to be talking about that. You can mention it, but that's not as much. And it's also not things like talking about how difficult, oh man, it's so hard out here in this, these people are, we're dealing with this and that. And so, the business people you're talking to, their lives are hard too. It may not seem like it, but they've got pressures that many of us can't imagine with trying to keep up with payroll and competition and government and all these different things. And so those are the things. Vision is not specific plans, your daily activities, or how difficult things are. A vision is a picture of the future. It's the outcomes, and I'm sure you heard a little bit of this last week with Ellen. It's the outcomes that result from your prayer, evangelism, discipleship, equipping, and sending out laborers over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So you want to be thinking about what is the ripple effect of your ministry. The direct ministry is quite exciting. The long term is really, I believe, part of your vision. So, for example, you want to talk about how you believe your target audience or your city or your nation or even the world will be different as a result of your ministry over these next few decades. And I believe that one of our jobs is to expand the vision of the donors that we're working with. Most of these guys have their heads down, these men and women, they have their heads down. They're focused on just just the grind of business. They need to stay on top of it. And so when we come to meet them, we're trying to get them to look up. And if I can help them think a little bit bigger and inspire them, that really works in my favor. Someone said something that's really helpful to remember. They said, most people will not remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. They will remember how you made them feel. So when I leave a donor, I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel excited about, wow, this is a ministry that's making a real difference. I want to make sure because my primary purpose for that first meeting is to get the second meeting. I want to make sure I can have that next appointment with that person. And so I want to make it in such a way that they enjoy that. Let me just give you an example of a vision of kind of what we share with Multiplied Impact. Several years ago, I was working with some young, successful entrepreneurs, and I really enjoyed it. There's five or six I got to know. I really enjoyed it, and so I was praying, you know what, God, I'd like to work with more of these people. I see lots of potential for them. Could you bring more of these people into my life? And God not only did that, but He allowed us to start the ministry, Multiplied Impact, and we've got well over 100 who've been through our program the last few years, and generally again under the age of 40 that we're trying to work with, and we help these leaders to develop a God-sized kingdom vision, and then show them how they can leverage their gifts, their passions, their platform, and their resources for a massive global kingdom impact. And over the last 5 years, we've seen God allow us to see this ministry grow and really seeing these people. What we want to do is we want to change the trajectory of their lives. For many of them, they're really all about business, about their own personal lives. But if we do our ministry right, we believe they're going to come out of this. And we've seen this. They're coming out of this with a greater vision. They're asking questions about how can I have a greater impact on the world for Christ? How can I leverage my business and my talent to help advance God's work around the world? And I want to mobilize, and I want to see these guys mobilize, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars over the next several years. And so I believe that if we do our ministry well, many ministries across many sectors are going to be accelerating in their work as a result of what these people are doing. So no matter what ministry you're working with, you want to communicate to donors the larger long-term outcomes that you're aiming for, that you're trusting God for. So if you're working with the poor, for example, you're not just working to meet their needs. You're working on really changing, again, the trajectory of their lives from poverty to becoming self-sustaining and healthy and being able to help others. If you're working internationally, you're not just providing food and education. You're helping to bring a biblical worldview to a culture that's often broken, and so that Jesus can bring long-term sustainable healing to these people and to their communities. So a clear, compelling vision is, in my opinion, the most important part of major donor development. If you don't have this, you want to spend a fair bit of time working with some people to help you get that, because that will really help you to do it. And one of the ways to communicate this vision is to have one really, really good story. And so you don't have to have hundreds. It's good to keep people updated, but you always want to have this one kind of go-to story when you're meeting new people. And for me, when I was in the campus ministry, it was the story of Eric. I met Eric in his first year. A friend of his named Mike was the guy who I was discipling. I trained Mike to share his faith. Mike leads Eric to Christ. Eric and I start doing follow-up together. He starts growing. I train him in how he can share his faith. He goes home one weekend, leads his mother, his sister, and four friends of his to Christ. Over the next couple of years, Eric actually moves into the residence and the dormitories on campus so that he can have a ministry where he starts discipling, leading, sharing the gospel, and having a ministry on that campus. And then at one point, we challenged him to go on a project over to country of Turkey. And he goes over there, loved it, came back and said, I'm going back for a year and I'm going to bring a team with me. Pulls together five other people for part of that team. During that year, they saw, I think, a couple of dozen people that came to Christ. He ended up coming back to North America, was working in Michigan for a while, where he was mobilizing other people within the ministry of Cru, mobilizing hundreds of students to go to the world, to take the gospel to the world. And a few years ago, I was in Canada at a conference with Leader Impact, another ministry with Power to Change, and I met this church planter from Turkey, and we start talking, and he's planted three different churches in Turkey. Amazing. And I said to the guy, because I said, how'd you get connected with Leader Impact? He says, I came to faith through the ministry in 1994. And I said, who led you to Christ? And he said, Eric, the guy that I had discipled and led to Christ myself. So that's a story of how a student, a single student, has gone on to have this massive ripple effect impact. And so you want to figure out what is a story that you can use that's really going to encapsulate and give you clarity on what it is that you do. You can talk about I do this and that, but when you start talking about this story, that's where people are going to really understand what to do. All right, so let's talk now about what to do with donors. For most fundraisers, they have a single objective when they meet a donor. They want to raise money from those people. And you know what? You can see these people coming from a long ways away. And most donors that I work with, they can see those people as well. But here's when I go to meet donors, I actually have five different objectives that I want to do. And you can put that slide up there. First thing I want to do is I want to value them. I want to minister to them. I want to inspire them. I want to engage and activate them. And then I want to help them invest in their passions. So it's not just about the money. So let's go through each one. I want to value them. Philippians 2, 3, and 4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. And so I want my donors to know that I care about them as individuals. I'm going to show respect to them. I'm going to encourage them about the success they have in business. I'm going to learn from them because these are smart people. They're gifted. I want to learn as much as I can. In fact, I would say that I've kind of earned an informal MBA from the thousands of different marketplace leaders I've spent time with. I want to pray for them. I want to pray for their business and their family. I want to honor them by starting and finishing on time. If I say I'm coming at 11, I will be there at 11 or before. And if I say I'll be done at 12, I'm going to be done a little before 12 because these people's time is valuable. And I want to really respect that. I also want to regularly communicate with them, give them updates. Just, even can just be a short 2 sentence email. Like someone just came to Christ. We just fed these kids. Thanks for your investment. Our schools are just opening up, whatever. And so, and all of these things show that I value them, not just for their money, but for who they are as individuals and who are partners that we're working together and having a ministry. The next thing I want to do is I want to minister to them. I'm often looking for ways to have a ministry in their lives. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, therefore, encourage and build one another up just as you are already doing. So I've invited some to attend conferences with me. I've given away tons of books. I love giving away books. Treasure Principle and Gospel Patrons are two of my favorite. Treasure Principle just talks about the light in light of eternity. How are you investing your resources? And talks about the parable of the pearl of great price. Patron, sorry, talks about the value of donors who are behind some of the most famous and productive and fruitful ministry leaders in history. So I love to bless them with these kinds of things to see how God will just inspire them. And I tell them, look, I know you're a generous person, and so I want to give you these books because I think you'll be encouraged and inspired by them. I love to give missionary biographies or point out podcasts or different books on marriage or parenting. I've trained people how to share their faith. I want to provide them other books that are going to inspire them in their faith and in their walk with Jesus. And so I also want to learn about one of the ways I minister to them. I want to learn about their personal needs and interests, and then try to connect them with resources that will help them accomplish that. And sometimes even introduce them to ministries, even if it's a ministry that's not part of what we're doing. And that really builds trust. When you say, you know what, when I was on worked with Power to Change, I was telling people about World Vision and I was telling them about compassion and international justice mission and different things like that. And so you're actually building trust by pointing them to other ministries because you're showing them that I want to help you have a successful impact on the world. I know that we're not the only ministry you're going to give to. So I want to get you connected with people that are going to really align with what you're doing. Just 1 second here. This next slide here I just want to emphasize this. This is important. Most of the donors you meet will be wealthier than you, more successful than you, and may have greater positions of influence than you. But most of the donors you meet will be likely less spiritually mature than you, less familiar with scripture than you, and less equipped for ministry than you. And the reason I share that is to show you that you have a lot to offer. We often elevate these people that are really good in business, and we should. They've done well, they're smart and gifted people. But we also need to recognize that we can minister in areas that they may not be as strong. They may not have had the opportunity to get as much input as you and I have had being in the ministry world. So never forget you've got a lot to offer. Okay, the third thing we want to do is we want to inspire them. Hebrews 10:24 says, and let us consider how to spur one another on to love and good deeds. And so these are people, as I said, who have a lot on their mind, but I want them to walk away from our meeting feeling encouraged. I want them to, through my vision casting or sharing stories about changed lives or a God story where they showed up in a cool way. I want them to be like, yes, God's on the move. God's doing good things because they don't often get to see that. And many times they look forward to meeting us because they don't hear about how God is moving in different parts of the world. And again, once they feel good about that and they're inspired, you've got a better chance of engaging them a second time. So I also look at the next thing I want to do is I want to engage them and to activate them. You can see there that each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And so there's a helpful acronym that I like to use that I learned from Crew many years ago, and it's called the Life Principle, which means I want to help people with their labor, their influence, their finances, and their expertise. So when I'm engaging donors, I have this in my mind. So let me walk through each one of these. So there's labor is they can volunteer their time. They're really gifted at helping out. In fact, for a decade, my wife and I ran a very large fundraising dinner. We had got to the point we had, I think, about 700 people that came out to that. And the last probably 3 or 4 years of us running that, we actually had one of our donors who actually ran it. We didn't run it. She ran the whole thing. She project managed it. She got the volunteers together. She arranged for the flower settings and all the table settings and all of that. And then she ended up being a pretty big donor as well. And so, we often miss the opportunity we have to help these people use their labor to help. So you want to think of ways, how are some ways that I can get them involved in helping our ministry? I would often have speakers or donors speak on campus for us. I'd have them come and talk about things like, insurance or their finances or talking about leadership principles or technology. So I've often invited in these people who have incredible talent because I wanted them to bless my staff. I wanted them to give input into our team. And so you want to look for opportunities to find other ways than finances, using their labor for them to be able to do that. And so, again, and I found what's interesting is when I call people and say, I just want to get together and maybe catch up on whatever, they may not return my call. But if I say, I love your help speaking for our staff about this area of expertise, they usually get right back to me. It's quite interesting. Second thing is influence. Again, these people can open doors for you. I'm always looking for a way to get an introduction to new people. I almost never do cold calls. Everyone I meet, I'm trying to figure out who else knows them that they can make that introduction for me. The warmer that introduction is, the better it's going to be for you, and better chance you'll have to get connected in. And so I often use LinkedIn if I'm thinking about, I know there's a donor, this person over here who I'd like to meet. Let me see who else knows them. And I've worked very hard at building my network, going to seminars and conferences and things like that to build that network. And through that, that's been able to introduce me to many other people. But in addition to this, I encourage the donors to leverage their influence to help them think more about how they could actually, use that influence to have an impact on their coworkers, on the industry they're in, and things like that. And so I'll often will challenge them, hey, how are you using that influence for kingdom purposes? We can provide some opportunities, but I'd like you to think broader than just us. I've got one social media influencer who's come through Multiplied Impact, and he's done quite well, and over 1 million followers, and he's actually become a spokesman for a nonprofit, a humanitarian ministry. And recently, he did a little promo video for him and let his network know about it, and they raised 6 figures from it. So it's kind of exciting to see these guys leverage their influence. The next one, obviously, is finances. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes, a little bit more, but I also will just want to mention I'm always asking donors to give both from their personal finances, but also their business finances. Group of young guys I was working with several years ago, I said, how much are you giving out of your business? And they're like, we're not giving anything out of our business. Well, have you thought about maybe doing that? And as we talked about it, they ended up making a commitment and ended up $250,000 a year was released for, different ministries that they were interested in. And so often they have lots more resources and different businesses that could be tapped into. Um, the final thing we wanted to look at is expertise. And I talked about that earlier, having them speak to you on things. But I've also had a lot of these guys who have come in and done strategic planning times with me to help me with my ministry and maybe thinking through marketing or leadership development or organizational leadership or technology. So again, looking for ways to engage these people's expertise. And again, most of the guys that I work with are better at all of those types of things than I am, even the ones that are younger than me, but I want to learn from them. And that, again, that engages them further. They love to know that they can help you become a better leader, which means that your ministry is going to be more effective. And that can often be a more valuable gift to you than actually writing a check and or giving a gift. So, so I'm often looking for different donors or whatever to do that with. Um, the goal, of course, the goal of raising money is, or of donor development is to raise money. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. In my opinion, the best way to raise money is to align opportunities with the vision and passions of your donors. The best way to raise money is to align opportunities with the vision and the passions that your donors already have. So people will give you small gifts, they'll give you token gifts because you've asked them and maybe you wore them down. They like you, whatever, they'll give you some gifts. But if you find stuff that aligns with where their hearts are, they're going to give you larger gifts and they're going to give you that money for a much longer period of time. And so when I was in the campus ministry, I was always looking for ways of connecting what we were doing with the hearts of the people. And in the campus, it's a little bit easy, but you'll need to get creative with this. But like when I met someone who said, I've got a real heart for children. And I said, well, you know what? In the campus ministry, we're working with the future teachers of Canada. And so if we do a good job reaching those teachers, it will impact thousands, hundreds of thousands of children in the next several years. So that's why we'd love you to consider partnering with us to help us reach them. If they had a heart for the poor, I'd say, you know what, when I think about reaching students in some of these other countries we're going to, we're reaching the future leaders. And those guys, as leaders in business and in government, how they lead is going to affect how many people become poor in the next several generations. And so we want to help not just meet the poor needs here, the needs of the poor here. We want to be thinking long term. How are we impacting the poor over these next 30, 40 years? And we think that what we're doing can help do that. So you want to be thinking about, again, how can we connect what we're doing with aligning with their hearts? And sometimes there may be some other ways. You want to think that you're not just, well, let me start say this. In order to do this, we need to become students of the people that we're working with. I remember having a couple of ministry people with me one time, introducing to them to a significant donor, and the two ministry guys talked to each other the whole time. I just was blown away by that. They never talked to the donor, and so those guys were not students. They were there basically to talk about what they're interested in and to sell the donor on their ministry. But the best way you're going to engage donors is you get to know them. I want to understand what's their heart. What are your passions? Where did you grow up? What are your motivations? What's been the most exciting things you've given money to? And the more I learn about that, then I'm having in the back of my mind multiple opportunities. So, for example, I may learn that, wow, these people were impacted by a conference. Well, you know what? One of the things we're doing, we have a conference we're trying to get people to. Would that be a project you'd be interested in? Or they recognize the value of leadership development or operations or resources. So you'll find that every donor has some area that they're interested in. So you want to unpack that and understand what that is, and then spend some time thinking about, okay, how can I actually present them with a proposal or an idea that will align best with what they're already interested in. And so again, understanding these will help you shape your future asks. I want to see us as serving my donors. And just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. In the same way, I think we need to be serving our potential donors. And I mentioned earlier, sometimes this means we're introducing our donors to other ministries. And so when I found out this person was interested in children, okay, there's this other ministry over here that I know about and like, so I want to tell them about that. The most important thing, obviously, you got to ask for the gift. You got to get to. And so now I personally have chosen never to ask for money in that first appointment because I want to show them I value them as a person. I'm not just here to ask you for money. And so this takes some planning. You need to make sure that you have a little bit of buffer in your account. In early days, that's harder to do. I get that. But I always try to get that second appointment where we can get back and talk about some of these opportunities. And sometimes I'll even ask them permission. Are you okay if we got together again? I'd love to tell you about some of the needs of our ministry to see if any of them align with where your heart is and that you might want to invest in. And so by giving them permission, the next time I come back, we all know what we're going to be talking about, and it works out much better. So when I do get around to asking for money in that second, third, fourth appointment, I want to be clearly presenting the need. We need $5,000 for this need. I'm going to ask them directly, Jim, will you prayerfully consider giving $5,000 to this particular thing? And so I want to make sure that they hear that ask, and then I'm going to wait. I'm going to let them respond in their time. And then what I'll often ask is if they say, Can I ask if they say no? I'll say, is that you're just not interested? Is the timing bad on this? Would there be a better time of year that might work better for you? And I find that often by giving people that 6 to 12 month kind of window in funding, they can actually kind of save up for it a little bit. So I can ask them for a little larger gifts. Or they may have bonuses that come at the year end or tax rebates or whatever. So now, the last thing I just want to touch on, and then we'll go into some questions here, is intimidation. When I first started, I was scared to death of pretty much everybody I was meeting with. I was quite intimidated by that. But one of the things I've learned is that major donors are some of the most kind and generous people that I know. A generous heart is just a good reflection of who they are. And again, some of these guys are humble, they're teachable. And of course, it's not always that way. There's not going to be all these people. Some of them are going to be a little more demanding. But as I said earlier, I like to try to work with donors who I enjoy being with. And many of these people are, again, quite wealthy and would love to invest in kingdom stuff that aligns with their heart. So, but I find that working with people that I get to know as I get to know them, also as you kind of know their story, again, that takes away some of the intimidation. You learn about their heart and their interests, and that gives you a chance to get to know them as friends and not just as people who are going to give you money. And I keep saying writing checks. I don't know if anyone does that anymore, but um, as I said earlier, remember that you have a lot to offer, and the ministry that you're involved in is valuable. It's important, and God is using you, and so you want them to recognize the value of getting to be a part of that. So. As I mentioned, just to wrap up, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, this content is a condensed version of a 5 session video series that I put together, being used by crew in different parts of the world, and also by several ministries here across Canada. Um, the series costs about $500, but for the people who are part of this seminar, we're offering it for $400. So if you're interested in this, I'll also mention that I have a limited ability to coach a couple of ministries in a kind of a quarterly basis. We can have a Zoom call or whatever where we can talk about specific questions you have. The video, obviously, anyone who wants to purchase that is able to do that. Simply email me and say I was part of the seminar with GCF and would be interested in learning about that. So if that's of interest, let me know, and I'll have my wife and assistant help get that to you. So let me just conclude with this thought. We have the privilege of helping wealthy people invest in eternal opportunities. That's incredible. That's an incredible gift that God has given us to do. 1,000 years from now, many of these people are going to thank you that you allowed them to invest in things that are providing an eternal and hundredfold return that they're going to be able to enjoy. So what you're doing is very important. And so that's all I got to say. Will, if you want to take things from here, and then we could take some questions.
All right, thanks, Greg. It's a lot to digest. Really appreciate it. And again, I encourage everyone, if you have questions, the link is in the chat. Please enter your questions there as we get started on question and response. So the first one is, how can I get connected with potential donors while I'm working out in the field? I would like to get connected and approach farmers groups for this one specifically. And I'm sure we have a lot of ministries on this call and in the GC family who will watch this later who are, their chief cook and bottle washer, like they're doing everything.
Yeah.
And so that tension of being in the field versus knowing I also need to do this donor development piece.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, the hard question is that I talk about the importance of ministry production versus ministry capacity. And so what often we do in ministry is we just focus on the production side. We're just grinding, we're keeping doing it. And if we kind of step back and say, I want to look at my next 5 years, what do I want to accomplish through our ministry over the next 5 years? I need to build the capacity of doing that. And so it's super important that you actually set aside time. You talk it over with your board and you say, listen, we need to take some time off from doing this ministry for a short time. I need to spend a day a week or half a day a week, or even just having a couple of appointments per month can be helpful. I would often try to schedule when I was in the grind of things. I had a number of staff reporting to me. I was working in 3 different provinces, was part of the national team. I just made it a priority to make sure that I'm building in 1 to 2 mornings a week to try to have a breakfast or a lunch or whatever with a donor. So if you're overseas, I'm not sure if this person is coming from overseas. That's obviously a little more difficult, but it may be that you try to just build some relationships through some quick Zoom calls. maximize your time when you're in town. Make sure you plan that, when you come back here, plan that very well, start working. And I find that for many donors, I need to book appointments with them usually 1 to 2 months ahead of time. And so, they may, if they know you, you can do that shorter. But I found personally, and others can maybe tell you differently, but these guys are busy. They've got, quarterly budgets coming up, they've got, sales they need to close, whatever. And so I want to give them lots of lead time so that I can actually make sure we can get some time with them. So I think, make sure you're investing that time, setting that aside. Getting some people to hold you accountable to that, getting the permission from, your advisory committee or board to do that, and then just, yeah, making those calls and setting them up to get that time with them. So.
Okay, thanks. If you don't ask for people to give in the first meeting and instead request a second meeting, doesn't that turn them off because it's more time that they have to give?
Yeah, I think it depends on how inspired they were by the time with you. And so if they were with you and they felt like that was a chore, then you're right, they're not going to want to meet you again. But if they met you and they're inspired and they felt like you actually, I try to always pick up the tab for the meal if I can. I try to give them a gift. I try to ask them how they are. I pray for them. And so at the end of the time, they're like, wow, this guy actually ministered to me. The vast majority of ministry people, when they approach donors, kind of assume it's the donor's responsibility to give and my responsibility to receive so that I can give in my ministry side. But I actually see giving for us ministry people goes both ways. And so if I'm actually blessing these people, if I'm inspiring them with great stories, they're going to say, I'd love to meet again. That'd be great. Now, again, you can't meet next week necessarily. You need to be sensitive. And I generally had about a quarterly rhythm is what I did with many donors. I found that was for many of them, 3 to 6 months was long enough where they could remember who I was, or they could some time could pass and I could have some new stories to share, but also not too long so they forget who I am. So yeah, so I think time is often these people's most precious. Commodity, but they do have time. They have time to do stuff. They have time to meet friends. They have time to, watch videos and listen to things. So they do have time. You just need to make sure that you are creating enough value that they want to meet you again.
Right, thanks. Right now, I have a budget that includes personal support and ministry support and fundraise towards the total number. Would you fundraise for those separately?
I haven't. With Multiplied Impact, ours is kind of merged together as well. And so we kind of raise our ministry. I've got myself and my wife who's part-time and then two other part-time assistants and then whatever else. We're about running about 330 a year is what our budget runs. And so I just tell people, I'm trying to raise $330,000 a year for our ministry, and so that includes my salary, these people's salary, some of the stuff projects we're working on, et cetera. And so I think a lot of people they're fine with that. There's others, when I was with Power to Change, there was a very clear delineation there. I had my personal support, and so I would say, hey, listen, I'd wonder if you'd be willing to invest in us personally. And many of them weren't aware that we needed to, raise support. And so once they heard about it, they were encouraged. Actually, just the other day, I was with a guy who came through our ministry, has been profoundly impacted by the ministry. We've become good friends, and he respects and I love him. We've got a great relationship. And I said, "Did you know, by the way, that we fund how we're funded?" He goes, "No idea." And I said, "Well, we raise support, and here's how it works. Would you be open to maybe $1,000 a month?" And he goes, "Yeah, I would love to. That'd be great." I was like, "Oh, okay, that was easy." And so obviously it's not always that easy, but again, I've kind of combined them, but I think I think there can be value in that. Just make sure you're clear on that, and they may want to know generally how much is personal. 40% of this is personal, 60% is ministry, whatever. You don't have to necessarily divulge your specific income, but sometimes you may want to do that too because they appreciate the transparency. So.
That's great. When I've asked donors for friends who they could refer me to build my network, they often say they don't know. How do I get past that?
That's a tough one. It's interesting because I'm an American and I've been in Canada for 30 plus years. And when I'm in the United States and I ask for referrals, they're like, "Yeah, let me open up my entire database to you, and I'll just give them a call, tell them I sent you." In Canada, it's like I can think of one guy and let me call him first. And so it is more difficult getting referrals I found here. I think a few things is. what I'll say is depending on what your particular ministry is. So when I was in the campus ministry, I would say something along the lines of, hey, listen, in order for us to grow our ministry, I need to meet more people. And so you may have some people in your network who have kids that are going off into university, and they're probably nervous about that. You may have some people that actually have, really enjoy youth and want to have a ministry there. So I want to actually give them categories. And I find that different categories can be really helpful in fundraising. Like, remember one time asking for a large group of people, do you guys know anybody anywhere who could get involved in our ministry or whatever? And the answer was no. And then I talked to a guy afterwards and he says, where are you going to next? I said, well, I'll be in Ottawa. And he goes, oh, I got 5 friends in Ottawa. And I'm just like, and so once you kind of unlock that category, that unlocks the part of their brain. So I like the categories are people who have kids, people who maybe have a heart for evangelism or a heart for the poor, people who own their own businesses. Do you know people who are in this city? And I've often found what I found is some people it's really, really difficult to get to. I went to just to Markham from Georgetown, which is an hour drive. But I let a bunch of people know, say, I'm going to be in Markham for the day. Can I meet you? And they're like, yeah, let me move things around so we can meet when you're in town. And so often, if I'm going to a place, so I'll tell a donor I'm going to Calgary in a few months. Is there anybody you know in Calgary or anybody you know in Ottawa, whatever? So again, the different categories I have found can kind of unlock that. And there's some donors, I have some of my biggest donors have never given me a single referral. And so that's okay. That's just who they are. Others who are kind of mid-tier give me lots of referrals. And I have other major donors who've introduced me to their entire network. And so everybody's a little bit different. So, I would just keep trying and keep knocking on that door and impress upon them the importance of you meeting some new people. And you say, listen, it's not just so we can get a bunch of money from them. And that's where I think the life principle is really helpful. I'm looking for people who can coach me. I'm looking for people who can, can maybe help out and volunteer. We're looking for specific, skills over here. And that may be another way of saying, do you know anybody who's good at, operations or good at this? And so through those things, now again, you're showing that, okay, your network is actually valuable for me to be connected to.
That's great. Uh, how can we avoid focusing too much on how we do our work, especially since it's easy to try to show donors that we're doing things correctly?
Yeah, I don't think most donors care that you're doing things correctly. You're going to have the odd few that do, and you may care about that. But a lot of them don't. A lot of business guys are big picture people. They are people that need 80% of the information before they make a decision, and they make quick decisions. And so I think that I don't think the how is that important for people. If it is, they'll ask you, and they'll say, "Well, how do you do this?" And then you can get into some more details. But really what the only way you're going to engage them deeper is that, well, for most people, is that you're going to say, look, this is what we're doing. We are trusting God to use us to have this kind of an outcome in this year, in the next 5 years, this kind of thing. And so the more you can cast that kind of a vision, now you're touching their heart. If you talk about what you do and the how of what you do, you're touching their head. They're not interested. Okay, good. You do what you do. I do what I do. Like, I don't generally ask a financial advisor how he does his job. I don't generally ask a business owner how he does it. We'll do that as we get to know each other, but most of them are just interested in what's the outcome you're doing. You may want to talk about your strategy, and you can even say, and let me say this too, one of the best things in building trust is talking about failures. When I'm talking to donors, say, hey, we just had an outreach, we just did this thing, and boy, it was a bomb. We blew it. Let me tell you what we learned about it. Because you know what? In business, they fail too, all the time. And they recognize that if you're actually never having failures, you're probably blowing smoke. You're probably not being totally genuine with them. And so the more straightforward you can be with them, that's the helpful. So again, for personally, I like the big picture. I find that a lot of donors really like the big picture. For some of you who are much more particular and detail oriented, that's going to be difficult. So you may want to work with even one of those donors and say, help me kind of draw out the bigger picture, the vision behind what I'm doing. Because I just am right now, I'm mainly talking about my day-to-day work, which again, not many of us are that interested in that. I think most people are more interested in the bigger picture.
That's good. I mean, I hear you. What I hear you saying is just how authenticity builds trust.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've
Um,
talked about, challenges we've had and parenting and actually it's amazing how that's opened up doors for me to, have really deep meaningful conversations with people.
Yeah.
Again, none of us like being around people that have everything together. It's just, and they usually don't. Like all of us are messed up at some level. So the more authentic we can be and genuine we can be, I mean, you don't want to spill all your dirty laundry there, but at the same time, I do think that authenticity goes a long way in building trust and credibility.
Yeah. We don't use social media except WhatsApp and prefer not to start. Do you consider it indispensable? If choosing one tool, is LinkedIn preferable?
Yeah, for me, the only time I really use LinkedIn is to kind of figure out who's in my network and how I can connect with them. I on occasion will reach out to someone through LinkedIn, but again, I will say, Willie knows, the Steve who I want to meet. Willie, could you just introduce us via email? So personally, I haven't used much social media. I'm an old guy, so kind of a Luddite in that space. So I don't think there's going to be, much value I can offer there. I think it's valuable. It depends on who your donor base is. If you're working with, the 20 somethings, then you may want to get on TikTok. If you're working with people that are in their 60s and 70s, don't worry about it. That's not an issue for them. So I think there can be some value. But no, I haven't found. I mean, one of the things that others will talk about, and maybe Ellen talked about, and Greg will talk about next week, is just even the branding that you can do using social media. And that can be really important, putting your stories out there for people to see and to be encouraged by what's happening. And so, I think that there's some great ways of doing that. I personally haven't done that. And also our ministry is a little bit of a different model. I don't necessarily, we just don't use that for our particular ministry. So.
Okay. How do you handle or process rejection when people say, "Yeah, no, not going to give"?
Yeah, I usually curl up in a ball and cry for a good hour, and then we come back and I mean, you just kind of have to know it's this part of the job. I mean, if you're involved in any kind of ministry of evangelism and even discipleship, rejection's a big part of our lives. And so I think, where it is we need to remember who we are in Christ. We are valued children of God. We are his adopted children. We are his ambassadors for Christ. And the great thing is to know is that the best perspective is, though that's really disappointing, I didn't get that person. God, thank you that I don't have to waste a lot of time on someone. For me, the worst thing is if they just kind of, string you along for years. I've had that happen. People just kind of, yeah, they're not interested, but yeah, next semester probably. That drives me crazy. And so, but I think rejection isn't a rejection of you. Um, One, it could be that, not all the time, but it could be that they're simply greedy. They haven't really grown in the area of generosity. And so that's between them and God. That's not between you and them. It could be that are very generous and they're so generous, they're committed to all these other ministries. And they've had, you're the 15th person that visited them this month and they're tapped out. It could be that they're rejecting you because their heart's in another area. I very strongly encourage the guys I work with, don't just give to everyone who asks you. You need to give a little bit, but give to those areas that you're passionate about because you'll give more money and it'll be a lot more fun. And so I tell people to say no. I actually train the donors that I work with to say no to things that they're not interested in. So all of that to be thinking about, the rejection is not about you. The rejection is really about, okay, God, who do you have for me? And just like when we share the gospel, some people reject it. They're not rejecting us. They are rejecting, others. And the other thing you need to think about, it's important to remember is, right now we're in very uncertain times economically. And so donors are not taking on new commitments in general, for the short term. And that's why, again, I like to kind of give the longer term thing and help because there will be a season where it'll come back. And so you want to make sure that, so the rejection it could be timing, it could be their heart, could be their greedy heart, could be they're overtapped or whatever. So again, I don't see rejection as rejection. I just see it as, okay, God, you got someone else for me.
That's great. We're a new small ministry just getting started. How do we grow our donor base and major donors?
Yeah, I mean, go back and review the film here. That's kind of what we were talking about. I think it's and if you want, I mean, I would recommend. I know it's as a new ministry, you don't have a lot of money, but I'm very confident that if you invest that 400 bucks in that video series, it will return a hundredfold return for you. I'm very confident of that, and probably more. But I think that a lot of it is just, one, pray like crazy. Make sure you're spending time with Jesus, asking him for donors. I like to pray very specifically. That's very important. God, could you allow me to meet one donor in the next month? Could you help me have one person come on to our ministry at 500 a month or 100 a month, whatever. And so always have that kind of praying and seeking that out. But yeah, I think I probably, don't want to go too much because that's, just review what we talked about here, but you're on the
Yeah.
right track.
Okay, one last question. Um, and that's the long distance question. How can I raise new donors while in Africa? Is a blanket email a good idea for initial contact? Scheduling Zoom meetings is no problem.
Yeah, blanket emails just don't work. I think that these guys, again, I remember talking to one CEO and this was like 15 years ago and he was getting 80 to 100 emails a day. Some of the guys I work with are getting 300 emails a day. So you've got to figure out how to cut through the noise. And so I think an email that says, Willie Reimer said I should call you. Oh, I like Willie. I'm going to go ahead and take
Mhm.
this email. I'm curious who this is and why Willie said I should talk to him, And when I do that, I would copy Willie and say, hey, Jim, Willie suggested I give you a call. And then Willie could just say, answer this guy's email. He's a good guy, kind of thing. And so I would try to use personalized connection emails as best you can. I think that, and the other thing that I've learned too, some people are email people, some people are text people, some people are phone people, less and less on that. Some people are WhatsApp people. And so you need to figure out, which one it is. I've got a guy that's in our ministry, really successful. I email him and nothing, nothing, nothing. And then I will, send him a message on WhatsApp and he gets back to me within, minutes. And so you just need to learn and try different things. So I'll often find that, and I can be tenacious. Tenacity is a very important skill in fundraising. And so if they don't answer my email, I will text them. And if they don't answer the text, I will phone them. And I'll just leave a voicemail, say, hey, I'm really sorry to bother you. Just wanted to follow up. I've left an email. Wouldn't mind if you could just take a peek at that and let's see if we can find a time. And I've had many donors who've said to me, man, thanks for that follow up. I got buried. Your email was number 57 on the day, and by the time I got to 300, at the end, I just lost it. And we've all done that. So I think, yeah, just I think from the person remotely, you want to do it. It's going to probably be more important to send them, the odd video or something like that. Not for new people necessarily, but to maintain with the people, because it's going to be difficult for you to grab a coffee or something. You'll want to communicate. Communication is going to be that much more important. I talk to way too many donors who say, "Yeah, I think I support this person. I haven't heard from them in a while." That's just the most common thing I've ever heard. And then people say, well, Greg, how do you raise support? I'm like, well, I talk to my donors. I tell them what's going on. It's like any other investment. They want to know what's going and what's happening. So there you go.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is helpful. And yeah, we'll look forward to hearing from some of you in the future, maybe.
All right. That is awesome. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank
Thank
you.
you to all the participants. And the this recording is available at your original link that was sent to you. It's on the Great Commission YouTube page as well. Our next session is The Generous Host, Creating Meaningful Donor Experiences with Greg Pennoyer, who is the special counsel to the CEO of Prison Fellowship International. And that will be happening on May the 7th at the same time. And so you can sign up there. You can pass that on. The link is on the screen as well. So thank you everyone for coming. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. And again, these resources are available to you, and we encourage you to connect with other GC ministries as you get the opportunity, and we can walk together to honor God and to further his kingdom purposes in the world. So have a great day, and we will see you at our next webinar.